Hey guys, I'm Coach Cadd and welcome to episode 1 of the Too Long Didn't Read Fitness Show, where we try and take studies and break them down into bite-sized and practical lessons that you can apply. This is episode 1 and I was joined by my friend Aaron Hoey today. That's right, this is the very first episode. Now, as a result, it was kind of slow and clunky to get into it. If you are watching this on YouTube, please try and ignore Aaron's horrified faces as there was a little bit of a delay and a lag. I tried to play it off, but just work with us. Give it 5 minutes or so and we start to get our groove and start to learn how to adjust for the lag. We're operating across a lot of different time zones, so stay with it. Today we went through a really interesting study and one of my favorites talking about the health benefits of coffee. As always, I appreciate you guys and I really hope you enjoy the show today. Do you want to give us the TLDR kind of recap of what's your kind of take homes from this study? What would you kind of give to a client?
Yeah, sure. So I think overall, I was actually quite surprised with how beneficial coffee did seem to be for people, and that wasn't just from the perspective of caffeine, but that was actually more so from the perspective of the actual the coffee itself and how it shared a lot of properties with plants. If they were really interested, I may even get them to go and get a gene test for that allele that sees how fast they can metabolize caffeine if they think that they may have it.
But yeah, I guess my kind of takeaways are on a pretty similar page. Like, it was really interesting to me to see how well or how strongly at a population level coffee intake was correlated with a pretty substantial decrease in all-cause mortality. And that's a big marker. We're not seeing, coffee having these small effects on this obscure disease. People who are drinking more coffee are living longer, basically. So I didn't realize how much of the developed world is getting some kind of nutrients from coffee. We are live on the first episode of the podcast. I said I'm not even sure what the kind of working title is going to be here. So we'll just call it the podcast for now. I'm sure I'll sub in a little intro over the top. But my name is Braden, on all of the social medias as Coach Cadd, and I'm joined today with Aaron Hoey. How are you, mate?
I'm not too bad, thanks, Braden. Yep, no worries. It's 7 a.m. here in Melbourne, and Braden, I think it's 9 or 10 p.m. there in Denmark. Am I correct there?
Yeah, it's nice and dark here, but that happens at about lunchtime. So just getting used to it.
Quite standard.
Yeah. Mate, so tell us a little bit about what you do, where you've come from. You've had a lot on your plate these last couple of weeks and months. It's been a while since we caught up. So do you want to just fill us in on what's been going on?
Yeah, so my name's Aaron. I'm a health and fitness coach based in Melbourne, Australia. I do most of my work out of a facility called JPS Health and Fitness, which is located in Airport West, where we specialize in body composition and strength training for both general population and athletes. Like most people last year, we got knocked out into the COVID lockdowns, and so I had to kind of sit down and evaluate what I wanted to do with my future, where we wanted to be in 5-10 years time, and decided to go back to university. So now currently studying a bachelor/master's of pharmacy full-time, and trying to combine what I'm learning at university with what I am currently doing in the health and fitness sphere. So my time is mainly spent these days working with people, athletes and Gen Pop alike, looking to improve their health and fitness, but also being able to kind of dip my toes into more like the medical and healthcare realm, which I find to be really interesting.
Yeah, very cool. So the last time we kind of touched on that, I think you were, like I said, we very interested in particularly the blood work sort of thing. Some of those health markers that are kind of overlooked by your general PT, not for lack of trying in some cases, but it's a whole world that, most personal trainers really shouldn't be diving into. So it is an interesting kind of space between
between the personal trainer, I think, and I know you and I have always been, a bit more concerned, than the average personal trainer, maybe about, stress management and some of the lifestyle factors. These days, there should be so much more to a personal trainer than just pumping in, calories and, an exercise protocol. But it is a bit of an interesting game of, people potentially then overstepping their line or, finding out what kind of education they should do behind the scenes. Without going too much into it, I'm sure this is one of those questions people hate to get when they're in any stage of university. What's the kind of bigger picture? Would you still like to keep your toes in the personal training field, or would you look, at moving a bit more extreme into the medical realm?
Really good question. I think that whenever I get these questions about the future, I always have to, like, even if I do formulate a good answer, it's probably only so that I have something more so to aim at long term, because situations can change so rapidly, as COVID kind of showed. Like 3-4 years ago, I probably wouldn't have thought that I'd be doing this course at university, but now I am. So the plan at this stage, and it's very much subject to change, is to, once I graduate, hopefully work in a hospital or like medical facility for a few years, just to kind of gain gain the experience, because from what I understand, that's where that's kind of that top level. And I think that would definitely keep me on my toes, give me a lot of challenges, like enable me to really excel in like problem solving from like a medical perspective. So I think I'd find that really fun. But also I think it will give you a really good insight as to what the current like priorities and practices are from a healthcare perspective. Because like you see people come in and it's like, okay, they've had this issue and the general guidelines suggest this practice to deal with this issue. And you can you can just kind of wrap your head around, right, like where are the general trends of healthcare going for certain conditions, which can enable you to problem solve and hopefully get the best kind of management plan for different individuals. Ideally, I do want to always have kind of a finger on more of like your athletes and your Gen Pop clients. In what way I'm going to have an interaction with those populations in future, I'm not too sure yet.
Yeah, I guess that'll be an evolving science. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of careers open up, and a lot more high level kind of conversations in that interim space between the extreme at-risk populations and the general practice. And I think this is a conversation for another time, and I'm sure it could be another full chat for us. But at the moment, that space is so filled with pseudoscience and quackery. But also, I don't want to be misquoted on this, but also kind of necessarily so, right? There is a gap in there which is leading people, for right or wrong reasons, to seek alternate, quote unquote, holistic, Eastern, whatever, different kinds of interventions. So in some cases because they need it, in a lot of cases because they are being sold that they need it. So hopefully we would like to assume that the kind of diagnosis, for use of a better term, for who kind of needs that and who's going to benefit from those interventions is probably, we'd like to think it's on an upward trend, and hopefully it will move the right direction over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think we'll have a podcast topic in the future and might call it like the distrust of Western medicine or something like that, because it does, it is a growing issue. And the more people who distrust the actual like the whole Western medicine model or conventional medicine, the more people are going to spill over and go looking for alternate solutions to their problems. And those alternate solutions may or may not be best practice. They may or may not be detrimental to their overall health. And it's something which really should be taken seriously by not just like individuals seeking treatment, but healthcare providers as well. Like it's easy to kind of go, oh yeah, functional medicine, like holistic gurus, like, oh, that's all quackery, but they're out there treating people for better or worse. So it's something which we definitely have to like yeah, good, like I think just good, honest, open communication between multiple parties is probably the solution to that, making sure that as a consumer, the consumers are well educated on what they're actually buying, or like what their medical condition is, how that medical issue is supposed to be treated for various reasons. I think that's like pretty integral knowledge for for those populations.
Yeah, 100%. And you make a couple of good points there, but in a lot of cases, and again, I'm sure I could get hate just for this alone, but naturopaths are kind of the pillar of pseudoscience in a lot of cases, but it's not for lack of understanding. In a lot of cases, they're going through an education system to learn, quote unquote, learn how to be a naturopath. Like they are doing some kind of study, right? They're doing what they're told is biology. So it's not to say that they're intentionally anti-science. They're not anti-evidence-based medicine. They want to, in a lot of cases, they're genuinely trying to help people and they want to actually learn proper biology. The system just isn't there to actually support, I think, biology at a high and accurate level, because of course if it was done at a high level it would then be called probably medicine. But anyway,
Medicine. Yep. 100% agree.
So before we go too far down a rabbit hole on that and make too many haters just off the start, or at least confirm some biases of people that are still listening are probably already in the wheelhouse. Mate, we've got a really interesting study today, or paper, I should say. This is one of my favorites from a while ago. I posted this, a little recap of this on my Instagram because it confirms all of my biases and I love it. We are talking about the health promoting effects of coffee. Which of course we all wanted to believe were there, but is still an ongoing discussion. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this study and maybe just a bit of a brief overview from your skimming?
Yeah, no worries. So for starters, like just to kind of reiterate, it's the health effects of coffee, not the health effects of caffeine. And that's important because the study kind of proposes that the health effects of coffee / caffeine are kind of mutually exclusive and separate to each other, which is really interesting. Basically, what the study did was it looked at some different comorbidities, so type 2 diabetes, chronic liver disease, certain types of cancer, and how all of these conditions were decreased in groups that consumed like fairly large amounts of coffee, which was really, really interesting. The study then went on to propose that, although it's not conclusive, they think that like the radical scavenging and anti-inflammatory effects, potentially from some of the phytonutrients in the coffee, could be one of the main causes for some of these positive health outcomes.
Yeah, so so the full name of the title is the Health Effects of Coffee Mechanism Unraveled, by Hubert Kolb. And so this is in in Nutrients, the journal, but they've actually got a special issue on coffee and caffeine consumption for human health. So I think everything from there is going to be a pretty interesting read. But this one in particular is really cool. Like you said, it's a really interesting look at kind of an overview, at least at a population level, of the seemingly health promoting benefits of coffee. And like you said, I think it is important for this conversation to kind of pull apart those differences between coffee and caffeine. And I think that'll be something interesting for us to kind of dig into later, because I know you, especially as going back into uni now, you're going to know exactly what the pros and the cons of excessive coffee consumption, caffeine consumption can do. But yeah, I thought this was a really interesting kind of a really interesting study for me, because to be honest, I hadn't really kind of dug too much into the theory behind how and why a vegetable is actually good for you. Now, is that within your wheelhouse? Have you done more thinking of that on me, more thinking on that than me?
I probably haven't gone super deep into it. I've certainly thought about like I think that one of the best things I do with clients, like whenever I tell a client that I want them to do something, I have to really, really break it down and say exactly why. So when I get clients and I'm like, I want you to eat more fruits and vegetables, and they're like, why? I'm like, okay, I actually need to put forward a good convincing argument as to why fruits and vegetables are good for you. Otherwise, why the hell would you eat them? Like, why wouldn't you just go eat something else? Like, you've only got a certain amount of calories in the day which you want to eat. Why waste them on broccoli if you could eat something which you find way more palatable? So if you kind of break down vegetables, it's like, what are we eating here? Or like fruits. And you're definitely getting like like fibers definitely shown to have lots and lots of positive health outcomes from like gastrointestinal perspective. And also, yeah, just from like healthy bowel movements. It's satiating, it's filling, which means that potentially you'll eat slightly less throughout the day, which is potentially a good thing if that's going to enable you to just like stay at weight maintenance and stay weight stable. And then on top of that, a lot of the micronutrition starts coming into play. So individual vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients, and small little compounds that have varying effects on physiology. And that's usually going to be a little bit more dependent on the actual type of vegetable or fruit that you're consuming. But for the most part, those things are going to be beneficial for us.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's one of those things that I love these questions or these studies because they do make me I ask that second level of why. You know, people ask, why should I eat fruit and vegetables? You're like, oh, because it's good for you. And then once you go through why, and you're like, oh, anti-inflammatory, you know, those buzzwords, you know, free radicals or radical scavenging, which is a term that I hadn't even come across a huge amount. Phytochemicals, you know, once you throw out some of those buzzwords, the next why really makes you ask the question. And we've talked about this, you know, before, but we even touched on it before. It's by the time you get to that third why or fourth why, that's where you start to get a much deeper understanding of the concept, and also once you've got that understanding, you're then able to accurately assess the claims made at a higher level. Right, there are so many things out there that claim to be anti-inflammatory, and so many things that claim to be, you know, positive for your health because of XYZ, you know, especially ketosis, fasting. What's the word? What's the word that people autophagy that people love like throwing around for like fasting and ketosis and these scientific words, right? But it's not until you go into that next level, and which is unfortunately a really deep dive, where you start to actually get some understanding that you can then use to assess some of those higher level claims, right? So to bring it back to this study, to quote the study, in fact, positive health outcomes include lower incidence of type 2 diabetes, kidney stones, Parkinson's disease, gout, liver fibrosis, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, liver cirrhosis, liver cancer, and chronic liver disease. Now that's a pretty huge list of things for just our coffees
That is
we're
a huge
having
list of things.
multiple times a day, right? I don't know if that applies for
Yeah,
Becky
I
and her
agree.
Starbucks with cream, but
Yeah, I was thinking about that actually, because like when I first saw that the coffee consumption had a kind of like a decreased correlation with type 2 diabetes, my first thought was, oh, potentially like the coffee combined with the caffeine has a satiating effect, which means that the person wouldn't necessarily go on and eat as many calories. Like we do find that caffeine does have somewhat of a satiating effect. So like a lot of people, if you're trying to, like let's say you've got like a long period between meals, especially if you're dieting, maybe in the morning, you might be able to get away with just a long black, and that'll kind of curb a lot of hunger kind of signals. Braden, I'm sure that you can relate to that from our contest prep days when we competed in bodybuilding. We're trying to really cut down, had low amounts of calories, and coffee was a bit of a crutch that we kind of lent on at times to really give us an energy kick and to kind of give us that stepping stone between meals. So I found it was really interesting because they actually did compare caffeinated coffee to decaf. And they found that even those who consumed decaf coffee, they also had a reduced occurrence of type 2 diabetes. And that's important because that basically eliminates the variable of caffeine. If they didn't look for decaf coffee, we might be sitting here questioning, oh, was it the coffee or was it the caffeine? We're not sure. The fact that they did the study and they used decaf coffee as a comparison means it's like, okay, it's something different than the caffeine that was actually causing that decrease in type 2 diabetes. So I found that was like really interesting. Additionally to that, it's probably the coffee that we're talking about probably isn't the your super duper triple shot mochaccino frappe from Starbucks with about 1,000 calories in it. We're probably talking more so about lower calorie coffees, because otherwise trying to keep that type 2 diabetes away when you're having 5,000 calorie coffees a day is probably going to be quite difficult.
Very true. I think not knowing whether it's Starbucks or your Italians on the corner drinking their espresso is definitely one variable in there. But that's actually one of the interesting things about the study as well is we're talking at a population level, so we are talking a lot of different habits around coffee consumption, whether that is instant coffee, whether that's filter coffee, cold press, those kinds of things is a really important conversation to have. And that's one of the issues that, it often pops up with population level, not population level, sorry, but epidemiological studies don't really take into account some of those habits or what the habits tell you. Right? If we saw that just the people who were having decaf coffee were getting the health benefits, that would be interesting. But we would look at that and probably go, well, maybe the people that are choosing to drink decaf coffee are health-seeking individuals in general. If someone's drinking decaf coffee, they're probably, they're maybe more in tune with how they feel after a certain coffee. Whereas the people who are drinking, the really highly caffeinated stuff, who would never go near the decaf coffee, might be doing that because they're staying up late partying, and then they're reaching for the good stuff the next morning. It's hard to try and extract that causality, and we shouldn't be trying to extract that causality from these kinds of studies, but it's really interesting to see this kind of accounts for, to a degree, health-seeking behaviors at large. Would you agree with that? I don't know if I explained that very well.
No, I would totally agree with that. With the health-seeking behaviors, that's like a really good point to make, because a lot of the time, people who do look for some kind of good, people who put effort into searching for a not necessarily a low-hanging fruit, but maybe a moderately low-hanging fruit from a health perspective, are more likely to be looking for other kind of low-hanging fruits. So yeah, those who go for a decaf coffee probably have better sleep hygiene, or probably care more about their sleep hygiene compared to someone who just kind of just drinks whatever coffee's on offer. That's pretty important to know, because we do know that sleep has some pretty ridiculous health benefits, and people who sleep longer hours are going to have lower cause mortality than those who do not sleep for as long. So definitely something to look into, and yeah, well picked up on that, Braden.
Thanks. I think it's nice to show that, if we've talked about sleep bringing down your risk of all-cause mortality, and now we're seeing here coffee consumption bringing down your risk of all-cause mortality. We're starting to see some patterns that definitely confirm my biases, and definitely remind me that it's important to keep that caffeine consumption, potentially earlier in the day. But even, potentially throwing in decaf, something like that, might be quite useful. The next thing that I kind of want to move on from this, because I found this really interesting, and I spout this kind of this fact a lot, or factoid a lot, is basically talking about how the caffeine response, or the individual response to caffeine, seems to be dictated by a certain gene expression. So we're not going to go too far into it, but there's a couple of interesting studies. I don't know if you've come across them, Aaron, talking about how certain polymorphisms, I believe the term is, or expressions of certain genes will dictate how an individual reacts to caffeine. Have you come across those studies before?
I've certainly seen them referenced and paraphrased, but I haven't read them in depth.
Cool. Yeah, I think I kind of took the clickbait version of those and moved on.
Yeah, definitely interesting though. So in a nutshell, like caffeine is going to have a certain half-life in the body, which means that once you actually ingest that caffeine, it'll only be like active for a certain amount of time until the concentration in the bloodstream is halved. That's like, it's like a half-life. And like a kind of standard half-life is going to be 4 to 6 hours for caffeine. So let's say you whack 100 milligrams of caffeine into your bloodstream. In 4 to 6 hours time, you're going to have half that amount of caffeine, so 50 milligrams still left in the bloodstream. However, some people will have a certain like allele, which enables them to metabolize caffeine faster. So there's basically these enzymes in the liver called CYP enzymes. They'll help you break down caffeine. And so yeah, if you're one of those like kind of like lucky/unlucky recipients of this like genetic mutation, you will be able to metabolize caffeine faster, and the amount of caffeine in your bloodstream will decrease faster. So they're probably like you definitely have to get a gene test to confirm this, but they might be the kind of individuals that can smash ridiculously large amounts of caffeine during the day and then seem to pull up perfectly fine. Some of that could be down to a tolerance thing. Like if you've smashed ridiculous amounts of caffeine for years and years on end, caffeine as a stimulant probably isn't going to have the same effect on you. That being said, like there will be people out there, like a small percentage of people, that they consume large amounts of caffeine, their body just churns through it faster than the average person's would, and they are left with a lot less caffeine in their bloodstream, which means it's going to have less of an effect hours after they consume that stimulant.
Yeah, cool. Really good wrap up. Look, and they actually talk about that in this study, and they talk about how that it's been pretty strongly correlated. People who, even if you don't know which genetic profile you have for that, generally the people who process caffeine faster will consume more caffeine. And that is probably a pretty, self-fulfilling prophecy. I think there's an element of that to, obviously everything to do with the body is very individual, but I think there's probably an element quite similar to that to do with alcohol, and people who process the alcohol faster will then most likely end up drinking more. And like you said, it can be a gift, but it can also be a curse. We do drink coffee a lot of times for its stimulative benefits, so it's not necessarily a superpower by any means to be able to process that quickly. I did actually have a client who used to have a I think, as she told me, she had a medically diagnosed overactive nervous system, and that could just be a throwaway term. I'm not sure if that's a medical term or not, but she had half a glass of Coke and then couldn't sleep for like a day and a half. And I was like, a night and a half, and I was like, that's the end range of what you'd want to go through.
Yeah, Coke doesn't exactly have that much caffeine in it. I think like a full from memory, I could be wrong, a 375 ml can of Coke probably only has like 20, 30 milligrams of caffeine in it. So that's pretty crazy if that's true.
Definitely stick to the decaf in that case. Moving on a little bit,
Yeah,
so one
sure.
of the things that they talked about in this study was actually going through some of the anti-inflammatory effects of coffee. And like I said, anti-inflammatory is this buzzword these days. It gets thrown around a lot with a lot of people not really understanding what it means. But again, that's probably a conversation for another time. But the anti-inflammatory effects of coffee are actually, according to this at least, not particularly relevant.
Yeah, I found this interesting. So basically, like, our bodies will always have some kind of form of inflammation in them. Like inflammation is kind of just like a natural process which occurs when we have like cellular turnover. And in the body, our like primary antioxidants to kind of like control that turnover are like your vitamin C, E, and glutathione, with glutathione being kind of dubbed like the body's primary antioxidant. This study here showed that like those three ones, like the CE and glutathione, were far more powerful antioxidants by comparison to coffee. So yeah, the actual radical scavenging effects of coffee are likely to be quite low, especially by comparison to some of the other systems that the body has in place in order to regulate the amount of free radicals in the body.
Yeah, and I really like it. Multiple times in this study, they'll go out of their way to kind of differentiate the effects between a medium and a dark roast coffee. So I think that's really interesting and worth taking note. I think one of the take home points is that you'd have to be pretty, health seeking to worry about drinking the roast of your coffee based off its, benefits or lack thereof. You're probably just better off going with the ones you like, but there does seem to be a meaningful difference. And even later on towards the end, when they're talking about some of the hypothesized mechanisms for these health benefits, they talk about the fact that roasting the coffee at least to a medium roast actually does increase the health benefits, whereas a lot of times, if we heat or overly cook something, it can in a lot of cases make it less good for you and break down some of those processes. But they seem to talk about how that actually enhances it. I did want to touch deep for a little bit, and I was going to talk about this, but I think I'll probably butcher it, and so if you want to dive into this one, feel free. But a little bit about the stress response on cells in the body. Now, that's a big topic. We we don't need to go into that too much, but stress is seen as this bad thing, right? We're so overly stressed in our workplace that we just think of all stress as bad. But you and I both know that every time you train, it's a massive stress on the system, and it's actually that stress, and it causes inflammation, and it's that stress and that response to stress that actually leads to a lot of positive effects.
Yeah. So stress, like as just an overall topic, is like relatively complex and convoluted. I don't want to get too stuck down into the weeds because we'll just end up being here all day. The best analogy I use for clients when I talk about like stress and like wanting, like needing a balance is I kind of use like getting a tan analogy. So if you go out in the sun, for example, and you've got relatively pale skin, it's not that the sun's bad, but your body only wants to tolerate a certain amount so that it can actually adapt to that and like start developing a tan rather than getting really badly sunburned, and then all of a sudden you're absolutely cooked and you're sitting there inside like smothering aloe vera on trying to manage it. And like oxidative stress and just stress in general is going to be very similar. So your body certainly wants some of that oxidative stress, and if you can actually manage that oxidative stress and adapt to it, your cells and systems are probably going to become stronger, more resilient. You're going to get certain health benefits. However, if you overwhelm the systems with ridiculously large amounts of oxidative stress, more than the body can handle, it's like that's going to be very overwhelming, and that's going to have detrimental effects on varying systems. So an example might be like, the brain is really, really sensitive to inflammation and reactive oxygen species. So if you were to take certain drugs that increased reactive oxygen species in the brain, that's going to put a large amount of stress on the brain. So the brain would always be trying to buffer that stress with some antioxidants, like probably like glutathione, and as like providing that that's done in providing that that's in like a balanced kind of homeostatic way, the body should almost always be able to deal with its levels of inflammation by itself. And if it can't, then certain like just lifestyle practices such as getting more sleep, like trying to chill out, like basically stressing less is going to be beneficial. And there are even certain medical practices which can be taken to kind of decrease inflammation, usually like, for example, like benzodiazepams and other things which like stimulate GABA, which is basically like an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Like those kind of things will basically down-regulate stress and anxiety, and in turn that would like decrease the amount of like reactive oxygen species circulating in the brain, and hopefully decrease the amount of like quote unquote damage that you may see from a neuronal level. I hope that wasn't too confusing and long-winded.
I think that was just enough of a taste into when we talk about stress being a very complicated process. That was just a little taste of maybe not fully into the weeds, but just on that outskirts there. Yeah, look, it's a huge topic and it's a really interesting one, and it's so much more. I hope people's takeaway from this is that it is so much more than just that dichotomy of stress equals bad. Like there is so much more that goes into the body, and it's this really complex system that people, in my experience at least, and particularly social media brings out the worst. But it's this biopic view that we, or myopic, sorry, view that we look through the body as, stress equals bad. But we also have this other view where we go, okay, we do know that exposing the body to stress in some cases allows it to adapt, right? And in a lot of cases, that leads to this really kind of surface level and probably horrifically inaccurate view of the immune system, where people, particularly in the past year, we've had a lot of people throwing around these things like, oh, we need to expose the body to something to let it recover, and so our immune system will be strengthened. But it is such a nuanced topic. We don't want to expose our body to these insane amounts of things, but we also don't want to completely cut ourselves off from everything by putting it into this good or bad bracket, right? And again, this is a trigger for both of us, I'm sure, but a lot of times this kind of comes up in this conversation around pesticides. And the same people who are willing to say, no, we need to expose our body to these things to let it adapt because it's natural, in a lot of other times will then turn around and say, yeah, but we can't expose ourselves to any inorganic pesticides or anything. There's just a lot of this a lack of consistency in rationale, and it just comes from us, I think, in a lot of ways not really understanding the nuance, and also then picking and choosing what kind of fits with our biases anyway, right? Which of course we're all partial to. Just moving on from that, or bringing that back to this study in particular. So we talked about, in the study they talk about potentially the positive effects from coffee coming from a phytochemical level. So they talk about the fact that it's probably not hugely from the antioxidant benefits. That's going to be some benefit, but it's probably not the driving factor. We're seeing a decrease in all-cause mortality, which for anyone who doesn't know is basically your chance of death. We're seeing a decrease of your chance of death from everything in people who eat a lot of who drink a lot of coffee, and it's kind of similar to people who are taking in high levels of fruit and vegetables. So antioxidants may not be enough to explain that on its own, but they suggest here that phytochemicals, and actually exposure to, in some cases, the cellular stress from phytochemicals, may actually be one of the things that promotes this response. Aaron, I don't know if you want to jump in on that. Again, I'm just throwing to you on all the big topics that I'm not sure how to recap. But do you know much about that, or anything you want to kind of add to that phytochemical response, or even just how, or some examples of, I know there's a lot of times where phytochemicals will get thrown around in the supplement world, in the fitness industry, as I guess with a lot of big claims attached to them.
Yeah, no worries. So like phytochemicals and like polyphenols. So like a polyphenol is basically like a framework of phenol molecules. So that's like kind of like its chemical structure. And they do seem to have health benefits in the sense that like just through a few different kind of mechanisms, they do seem to be at first glance like beneficial to like the gut microbiota, just in the way that it plays a similar role to just like standard kind of plants, fruit and vegetables. Given that caffeine or coffee comes from a plant, it kind of makes sense that they share some similar properties. That being said, and I think this is the important one, and this is the kicker, the recommended daily intakes of polyphenols and phytochemicals, like there is no recommended daily intake. And one of the reasons for that is because they haven't been able to discern like an exact mechanism as to why these are beneficial. So where you'll get other vitamins and minerals and like macronutrients, for example, and they'll actually be like a recommended daily intake, and you'll actually be able to look it up and be like, oh, like calcium, that's good for me, but that's good for me in these doses, and I should probably stay within these doses. And if I'm on the low end, I can supplement with this variant in this dose. But with phytochemicals and like phytonutrients, there's just not as much evidence surrounding exactly how they're beneficial and in what doses are they beneficial. We just seem to know that the foods that contain them seem to be beneficial. So even though like at first glance it's like, yeah, like this stuff's probably having some good effects, we're not exactly sure why they're having those effects and in what doses they would need to be consumed to have the effects. Now that's just from like the polyphenol kind of standpoint. We're seeing that coffee seems to be having some good effects, and from the study, like the study kind of suggested between 1 and 5 cups a day seems to be pretty beneficial, with more cups a day proving to be more cups a day proving to be more beneficial. So like that's awesome, but yeah, the phytochemicals and the phytonutrients seems to be a little bit more murky as to their exact benefits.
And that's one of the ones for me that's like, again, just I'm just bringing up all the things that trigger me and then telling you that we're not allowed to dive too deep on it here. But that's one of the ones, the conversations around, dark chocolate and red wine and these things that get thrown out as being, these are health promoting foods. I think even beers come under the microscope for headlines like that as well. They've got like polyphenols in them. Like, it's great. You should be drinking this glass of red wine a day or something like that, because it's based off like you said, this macro view of, well, we know the food has this effect. We're not sure why, we're not sure the exact mechanisms, but it seems to be this food that has this effect. And we're seeing both now how we're looking at coffee as an example of a macro food that seems to be showing positive effects. But then, when it gets thrown around with red wine, it is very much okay, this one element of it, the polyphenols in red wine seem to be having this effect, but also let's take a look at the bigger picture of, okay, well, the alcohol in red wine is probably not doing you any favors. And I guess the same argument could be made for the caffeine of coffee. Right, we do know that we're looking at the coffee having that benefit, but if we look at the actual macro product, we also know that the caffeine has a bigger effect than just the health promoting benefits of the coffee itself.
Yep, I would agree totally with that.
Beautiful. Mate, look, I think we might pretty much wrap up there. I think we've kind of gone through the main kind of takeaways. Do you want to give us the TLDR kind of recap of what's your kind of take homes from this study? What would you kind of give to a client?
Yeah, sure. So I think overall I was actually like quite surprised with how beneficial coffee did seem to be for people, and that wasn't just from the perspective of like caffeine, but that was actually more so from the perspective of the actual like the coffee itself and how it shared a lot of properties with plants. From a practical standpoint, I would certainly not. I'd probably just like tell my clients that like if they enjoy coffee, go for it. It's probably going to be in their best interests from a health perspective, and just to be somewhat mindful of the timing of that coffee. Trying to probably bias it more so earlier in the day rather than later in the day, just so that the caffeine doesn't impair their sleep. And yeah, if they were really, really interested, I may even get them to go and get a gene test for that allele that sees how fast they can metabolize caffeine if they think that they may have it. I actually haven't looked into the test. If it's really expensive, we may not get it done. But if it was an easy one to do, then hey, it's like it'd be kind of cool just to delve into if you're really interested in that kind of thing.
If of all the things that you can pay for nowadays, you can get gene tests for everything. People are getting you to get there's people out there selling blood tests for blood type diets and things like that. You'd be much better off spending your money on figuring out how well you process caffeine, because that could definitely assess how much money you can spend on coffee. And from both of us,
absolutely,
from both of us spending a lot of time in Melbourne, we're very partial to coffee. I'm now currently in Denmark, where a coffee is about 7 to 9 Australian dollars. So my vegetable intake, according to this study, has dramatically reduced, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I guess my kind of takeaways are on a pretty similar page. Like, it was really interesting to me to see how well or how strongly at a population level coffee intake was correlated with a pretty like substantial decrease in all-cause mortality, and that's a big marker. We're not seeing coffee having these small effects on this obscure disease. We're going, people who are drinking more coffee are living longer, and to not overblow the causal effect of that by any means. It's an interesting correlation, and it's interesting to look at. I mean, one of the things that they said was that, let me see if I can find this here. At the level of populations in the developed world, coffee provides more dietary phenolinic phytochemicals than fruits and vegetables, basically. So I didn't realize how much of the developed world is getting some kind of nutrients from coffee. So basically the take home point for me is that there really doesn't seem to be a lot of negative health effects to coffee. And I know that, it gets demonized every now and then, and people will try and detox from coffee because they're told it's healthier. And realistically, I don't think we've got a lot of evidence to support that. If you want to, just to kick it as a drug, then by all means. But if you enjoy your couple of cups of coffee, if you're not having massive amounts of caffeine or energy drinks as well, then I really don't think it's going to give you any negative effects. And I really think, if anything, it's gonna have some slight positive effects, at least on your mood and personality.
I would agree. And also, just to add to that, the health effects of decaf seem to be relatively consistent with the health effects of normal coffee. So if you're actually worried about the caffeine and you wanted to kind of like kick it or have a detox, as Braden suggested, you're probably going to be better off switching to a decaf coffee rather than going cold turkey and knocking it out, given that the decaf itself does have a lot of the same benefits that the full caffeinated coffee does.
100%, really good takeaway. There'll be a lot of people right now who are trying to cut themselves off coffee who wish that they had heard that message sooner, I think. Mate, well, thank you for jumping on nice and bright and early for me. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at aaron.hoey. Yeah, I do most of my kind of coaching business stuff on that Instagram page. Also, more broadly, you can follow JPS Health and Fitness and JPS Education on Instagram, or follow our YouTube channel, which is JPS Health and Fitness, and I'll be popping up there from time to time, trying to get some information across.
Amazing. All right, wait. Well, thank you. This was a bunch of fun. I'm going to steal you again for a few more projects in the near future. But of course, if there's any particular topics that you want to get into, or anyone listening to this, if there's any studies or topics that you want us to dive into, feel free to let us know. And we'd love to try and give a little bit of a recap on what you need to know and some practical advice you can take forward. So Aaron, thank you very much, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you for having me, Braden.
And that's everything for today on this episode of the Too Long Didn't Read Fitness podcast. If you can take a second to like, subscribe, leave a comment, share, whatever it is, it all goes a long way to help us boost our little ranking within the algorithm. Thank you to everyone that's left reviews and comments already. It goes a long way. And if you would like to support us a little bit further, you can go through the link on my Instagram or the link in the description, and you can actually buy us a coffee. We aim to put out as much high quality content as we can on as many different free forms of social media as possible. So if you've got some value out of this and you would like to give back in some way, consider pay as much as you think the episode is worth. You can do that through the Buy Me a Coffee link, which will be available somewhere in the description box. If not, that's absolutely fine too. You can help us out other ways by sharing, doing whatever you can, just tell your friends about it, and hopefully they can get some value out of this too. Or if you've got any kind of feedback or thoughts or any topics you'd like us to cover, you can send me or Aaron a message over on Instagram. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode and hope you're great. Chat soon.